Knowledge and outcomes are not the same thing. In fact, I would say that there's probably an inverse relationship between the two. So sometimes the smarter people are, the less inclined they are to act because they're a little bit more afraid of failure. And so those people that are experts don't want to look like failures. And the reality is only the people who do the work that know that failure is a part of success. They are one and the same, different sides of the same coin. The truth is you do need to get acting. And sometimes the real problem is, I'm not sure where to start. People don't know exactly what they should be doing first. So they want a prescription with a sequence that's tried and tested. Do this thing. When that happens, do this thing. When that happens, do this thing. When that happens, do this, this, or this. This is how you decide.
I think one of the best things is the ability to be safely vulnerable in a group. You don't actually need to hide. And the problem when you hide is you're sort of keeping it from the world, and you can't solve a problem you're not willing to accept. And there's great power in just saying, actually, I'm really struggling with this thing and I need some help fixing it. And suddenly you've got, yes, your coach and your coaching group, but also your peer group together and helping work on it. Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Scale My Clinic podcast. We're talking about today, all of us want a better practice, more success in our business. The question is, how do we get there? And one of those ways is through coaching. Today, we're just going to explore coaching to help us understand a bit more. And to help us do that, my partner in, I'm not going to say crime, but I am, my partner here in business and half in life is Glenn. And so Todd is here, and he's going to help us answer that question. Hey, welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Sachin.
Let's get started. Tell us, what is coaching and maybe what it is and what it isn't?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question that a lot of people ask us, of course. And I might start with what it isn't. And so what coaching isn't, it's not really advisory or consultancy where people go and pay for a consultant to come in and fix usually a more specific part of the business. Because by definition, if you're choosing a consultant, you've identified the problem yourself. So you've kind of said, yeah, I need help with getting more patients or recruiting a GP or something like that. And these circumstances where you're paying for a consultant, in most cases, let's just say with GP recruitment. So whilst you might pay an agency to fix that problem for you, to recruit a GP, they've never actually recruited a GP to work in their general practice because they're not general practice owners. So people have usually done, consultants or advisors have usually done one part of the issue or challenge that you're trying to solve, but they haven't actually done all of it. They haven't had the other side of the experience. The challenge with those type of interactions is that they are limited by the experience of the consultant, of the expert, and the owner combined. Their combined knowledge is the sum total of the possible outcomes that can be created. And that circle at its biggest is optimized for everything being right. And the things that reduce the size of that circle, the things that affect consultations, actually, that abbreviation is HALT, HALT. If you're hungry, angry, late, tired, probably not enough caffeine might come into there as well, section. And then there's also some other variables, your ability to comprehend advice, absorb it, and then act on that advice accordingly. And the other thing I'm reminded of here is one of my favorite books is a book by Marshall Goldsmith. I know you've read this many times, called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So Marshall is one of the world's foremost experts on executive coaching, and he coaches the people who are the hardest to coach because they're already successful people. And that means that they're not great at taking advice because they kind of think, well, I've already done all this stuff. Getting paid a couple of $1 million a year or more. Why do I have to listen to you? What he found when he went back to, he did this for a couple of decades before he thought, shit, maybe people aren't actually doing this stuff. Somebody said, what's the success rate? He said, she don't really know. So he started going back to the people that he'd coached. He realized that the level of implementation and success was actually quite low because it was a low accountability environment and transfer accountability. So I think that's a good description of what coaching isn't. But before I leave the consultancy, I'd like to say that it does serve very well in one very deep niche. So say, for example, you need to solve a problem of, I need to get 500 new patients per month via Facebook or via search engine marketing. If you've got a specific thing you want to solve and you're getting an expert in to teach your team and to solve the problem until you've got a resolution, so it's a tightly defined niche and a really clear outcome, it works very well in that type of area where you've got a specific goal and outcome. And it is really expensive because you're obviously paying for this person's expertise one-on-one. And if they're a genuine expert, they shouldn't be cheap. So if they are cheap, you probably should be nervous about that. So that's a long description of what it isn't. Would it be okay if I jump into what it is?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So you and I do this a lot in coaching owners, in general practice owners. And what we really want to know, first of all, is, and this is one of your sayings, but progress begins with the truth. We need a bit of an audit of where are we now? What have we got to work with? What's working well? What are the barriers? And what have been the obstacles to getting to where you want to get to? And then we really want to have a good understanding of the aspiration. What are you expecting in the short, medium, and long term? What do you want this business to do for you? And then in order to kind of bridge that gap, we need to understand what are the barriers, obstacles to you getting there. Because obviously, if there were no barriers or obstacles, you would already have done this. You wouldn't need coaching. We wouldn't even be talking about this. And then part of this is the mindset I need to adopt in order to overcome these fears, uncertainties, and doubts I have around doing this. I think that mindset is often given scant attention to because it's usually the reason why people haven't got to the end goal or even made progress on that goal, because they lack the requisite beliefs or actions of somebody who is successful in those areas. And so I think that's really the key and what coaching is there to unlock, much like you would if you were a coach of kids' sporting team or a professional sporting team. You really want to be able to unlock the potential of individuals and then teams more broadly. And the team more broadly is the business, really. And the way that we do that is with three things. You're going to need a plan. Everybody needs a plan. And I don't know who to attribute this to, but the utility of the plan itself is often not that high, but the process of planning is where the gold is. And so actually having a habit of planning, you're going to need the tools, and the tools need to evolve to suit the environment. So a tool, a process that you used 10 years ago is probably not going to be appropriate. So having the right tools for the job. And I think in my head, when I think of tools, I think person who's got a beautiful garage, this of me, I own one single power tool, nothing of any sort. I outsource all that stuff. But let's pretend I was somebody who did do all that stuff. My garage would have a beautiful wall with a shadow board. And a shadow board means there's a little shadow of all the tools. So everything goes exactly in the right place. And anytime I need something, should I have the desire to fix something or improve something in my house, I just go to my tool board and I say, this is the right tool for the job, and I'll grab that. Good training is like that. Good coaching is like that. And so the tools should all be the right tools for the right job right now. And then you're going to need help, because the reality is not everything works out as you plan. And I think Mike Tyson said this most eloquently when he said, everyone has a plan until I punch him in the face. And the reality is that business is going to punch you in the face. And I've got to tell you, the people I love working with are the people who've been punched in the face a few times, because they actually get that it's just part of the game, right? You've got to be, business is a contact sport. You've got to be in the arena. You've got to be okay about receiving those punches, because it's part of learning. And this is metaphorical, not physical punches. So please don't mistake the two. And the metaphor here is give a person a fish, feed them for the day, teach them how to fish, feed them for a lifetime. So coaching really is about teaching people how to fish. And one of the things people often come for in terms of coaching is they come for knowledge because they think knowledge is the solution, right? If I just knew 1, 2, 3 more little tricks, or I had 2 or 3 more little special tactics, then I'm probably 2 or 3 tactics away from solving all of these problems. And so knowledge is what people come for. And, GPs are lifelong learners. If you're a GP, you've done 10, 12 years of study already just to get to where you are, let alone be an owner, which have been usually multiple years beyond being a GP graduate. And then the thing that people don't necessarily come for, but they get when they're in group coaching in particular, that's certainly what we do in Project X, they get connection. And connection is where you're then seeing what's possible by what's going on around you. And there's that saying, you can't be what you don't see. I think that's really important. And you have talked about this before, but you borrow a little bit of confidence from the people around you, or you just look at you go, Sachin's not that different from me. He's a little bit more handsome and maybe a little bit more entertaining, but I could do the things Sachin can do. If he's doing it, I reckon I could make a fair fist of it. And in communities, people should be sharing their stories, their progress, and also where they've got stuck and they've had challenges, because otherwise you're kind of just sharing one side of the journey, the full spectrum of experiences. And so the connection comes between having that group of people around you that are there to support you. They're kind of in your corner. And then there's another layer below that I think is really important, which is belonging. And in that layer, you really start to feel like, I deserve to be here. I have the stripes. I've done the work. And then I think it starts to evolve to a different layer too, right? You have your purpose is not just about your own business, but it's a pro-social purpose. You're like, I'm here for all of general practice. I'm here for all owners, because I'm not just playing a game that is about me winning or losing in my practice. I'm actually playing a game which is a bigger game. I have more generosity. I'm playing mostly against my younger self. I want to improve over that. Next month, next quarter, next year, I want to feel a little bit embarrassed about how bad I was earlier, because I want to be playing a bigger game all the time. And part of that is about just making sure that you are actually playing with that pro-social purpose. And I think one guy we worked with, David Burkus, covers this really well in the book that he wrote called Pick a Fight, which is a great read if anybody is listening or watching this and wants a book on what is pro-social purpose, how does it work. He covers that really nicely.
Absolutely. So truth bomb there, just if you didn't catch it, more handsome, but more entertaining is me. And we say progress begins with the truth. And today is a great moment of progress for Todd. Now, so what I'm hearing, to summarize, Todd, is it's not a course. It's not just information, right? Coaching is not information, because in fact, information is probably in oversupply right now. We are inundated with information from all angles, and at times it's quite difficult to process. But probably, I think if I heard you right, what you're talking about is clarity. So clarity around what's important right now. It helps you, when you're coached well, it helps you select that. You can then make better decisions faster. And then it's really about the rubber hitting the road, which is all about following through on the decisions you've made. Because often we'll have great ideas up here, but they don't make their way out of our hands to put them into action. And so it's really about helping you clearly decide and execute. And of course, information is part of that, but it's not the majority of that. It's actually the follow through that's key. And I feel that there's a book coming.
I was going to say, you're just talking about the camera's reversed there, so it's a little bit harder to read, but The Road Less Stupid. Just talking about not making mistakes is something that I didn't talk about, but it is really super important. And Keith Cunningham in that book talks about the dumb tax that we all pay through. Generally, that most doctors know the Dunning-Kruger curve. The reality is that all of us exist on that curve in different domains. And a lot of the time, the biggest mistakes we make are when we were sitting atop Mount Stupid, where we don't have sufficient context or knowledge in the area we're about to embark on. And often we've got an abundance, a surfeit of enthusiasm or hubris. We go and make decisions based on overly optimistic expectations, and then that falls over. And that can really damage confidence, as well as actually cost you real money. I did this. He asked the question in the book, what would be the size of the check I would have to write you if I was able to refund you your 3 biggest mistakes? I remember doing the maths, and I actually stopped at about $2 million. Sometimes it's an opportunity you didn't take that you should have, or more commonly something you did that you shouldn't have done. You may have had an opportunity cost. Coaching helps you reduce the risk of making stupid decisions. And you and I have really met people after they've made that stupid decision. But if I ask you, Sachin, what do you reckon would be the amount of time that people have locked themselves away from opportunity for by making stupid decisions?
Yeah, maybe I'll use a softer word than stupid, but same thing. It's going to have been made without requisite information, without the right support, without the right expertise. Probably the most common ones we've seen, Todd, are the people who massively overpaid or overcommitted to something. The overcommitments might be that they've been, should we say, out negotiated on a lease because they just weren't aware of what was actually possible. And then they're locked into this legal agreement, which means there's very little room for maneuver. But probably the one that sticks out for me above everything is the people who buy a practice that is just way overvalued and then are locked in for a decade at least or more of pain, often in their sort of prime family years, which is the bit I really grates with me. Like, it might be mid-30s, they're ambitious, they're committed to general practice, they see what they believe is a good opportunity, And it may well have been if it was at the right price, but actually the vendor has an unrealistic expectation of price. However, maybe they've got an accountant who has fueled that unrealistic expectation. Then the purchaser may have someone who's not an industry expert on their side when doing their due diligence and therefore overpays. They naively might think that, oh, the bank's lending me the money 100%, so it must be fine. And then you unpack it and they've just bought themselves a job, and often up to 7 figures excess in borrowing, because sometimes, and we've seen it, they paid $1 million more than they should have for this practice, and now they're carrying all the weight of that, and the next decade is then gone. And so more than the money, it's that time, that decade with family, loved ones, missing events, etc. So that's probably the biggest ones I've seen. And probably the only other one is one I've been guilty of at times in the past, is splitting focus. So not having someone to just call you out and say, or question you. You think, oh, this business is doing okay, but what I really need is it to do better. So what I'll do is start another business. And what you really needed was someone to slap you around the face and say, just get that one right and then worry about the next one. It's not that it's not right for you, but maybe right now your job is to optimize this one, or make a choice. Don't be the person that chases two rabbits and gets none. So they're probably the things I've seen.
Yeah, I think the damage from the overpayment is a really big deal. Like you said, if you've overpaid $1 million on something and you've lost a decade of opportunity, when you work in interest repayments over that time, you're probably repaying 120, 130 grand a year above the true value of the business. There's only one place that comes from. That comes from either your personal exertion labor or reduced profit distributions to you. Usually people make that up with more personal exertion. And that's probably another 50 plus days a year that you'd be working to neutralize that. So 50 extra work days a year for making a mistake in not getting good advice, not being part of a group at the time to give you advice, because as you rightly said, all of these people have been advised by an accountant and they had somebody financially approve the transaction, and falsely those people believe that is a type of approval, but it's actually just people telling you that the bits they've read are true, but it's not actually a sense check about what is this really worth. I think that's a big deal. So we've probably gone enough down that rabbit hole on over the top, but it's a big deal, right? Like the dumb tax is real. And you don't want to pay more than you absolutely must. It's impossible to make progress without making mistakes. I think that's important to say. But you do want to make sure that they aren't fatal and that they certainly don't cost you a decade of your productive working life.
Absolutely. Like if you put a quantitative figure on a decade, so at the central premise of any type of coaching is to help you achieve the desired result faster. And so I think on the flip side of this is, if I could save or accelerate my progress by 3 years or 5 years or whatever, number of years, what is that worth? And I think for most of us in medicine, the time is even more valuable than the money, especially given how much time and energy we'll have spent over the years in our education and training, both undergraduate and postgraduate. And so it's often the thing we give away most cheaply when it's actually the most valuable. And when you ask your loved ones or those that are near and dear to you, they want more of you and your time when you're a fellow human. So, all right, we've talked a bit about that. We've talked a bit about the dumb tax, the stupid tax. You mentioned something earlier about one-to-one and group. There's all sorts of types of coaching, business, leadership, executive coaching, all sorts. But regardless of the type of coaching, it tends to be one-to-one or group that the people sort of will encounter. What do you think about that? Because normally one-to-one, it feels like it's just for me, it's personal for me, it's much more relevant for me. That's often a belief that we might hold. What do you say about those two perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the best analogy for this is that the foundation of all education is classroom, and the only one-to-one education that's done is really augmenting classroom teaching with tutoring. That might be one-to-one or small group. And so I think it's the same. The reality is that, again, much like the consultancy, the limit for one-to-one is the knowledge and experience of the two people and how resourceful they are in the time. And then there's content and context. So the content, here's the training, here's the thing you need to do. And then the context is, how does this fit into my environment? And the challenge is that most people can't describe their own environment in enough detail for it to be relevant in a one-to-one encounter, because you just can't know everything about that person or their environment. You're not going to do a history of all of their beliefs, and you're just not going to know all of that. And so it's only through the group coaching environment that you really unlock the proper insights that people need to have, because it's through the context provided by everybody else. And this is where the clinic most like yours, or somebody who's just undertaken the change that you're wanting to change, that might well be somebody that's on the other side of the country that you would never, ever come across. I mean, the odds of you sitting next to somebody who's not whinging when you go out to a GP function is very low, let alone you're sitting next to somebody who's actually useful, who has some kind of context around some change you want to make that they've already done. The odds of that happening are pretty close to zero. And so I think the same thing is true in one-to-one, where people think it's better because they feel like it's bespoke. It's not bespoke, and it can't be, because it's obviously limited by that person's experience. And just on experience, Sachin, it's probably worth saying right here that the experience that matters is the person, ideally, the coach, should have done the thing they're talking about. And as well as doing it, they should have coached many other people through it. So, for example, it's somebody who knows technically how to climb Everest to guide you up Everest. You want the Sherpa that's done it 10 times and has brought 10 of them back, and maybe they had a tough one that took a bit of extra work. That's what you want, because the odds are that person's more likely to get you there. If they said, oh, this person's a first-time Sherpa, they're probably cheaper, but do you want to save the money on that, or would you rather go with the person who's done it 10, 20, 30 times? Because in your head, what you're thinking is that the odds of me succeeding are higher if they've done the thing that I actually want to do. And I'm going to be really honest here and say that in coaching and advisory, most people haven't even come close to doing the things that they talk to people about doing, because they just can't have done them. It's just too difficult to have accumulated that experience. And so I don't mind saying you and I have done those things. We've done them ourselves, and we've taken other people through them. More than 300 practice owners Australia-wide have gone through coaching with us. And so that's really important, I think, if you want a higher probability of success. Then the other thing I think that's really important just about coaching is there are only 3 levers that you can pull. And the truth is that all of us had the same 60 minutes in every hour. Doesn't matter whether you're Jeff Bezos, whether you're Taylor Swift, we've all got the same 60 minutes in the hour. And the levers that people have to pull are time. No matter what you want to achieve, there's a duration of time that has to pass. If I say to you, hey, Sachin, I want you to learn a new musical instrument, I want you to learn how to play golf, no matter what, you're going to think, okay, it's going to take me 12, 18 months, 2 years, whatever that time might be to get good at this. And then you're going to know that the only way to shorten that is the amount of work you put into it. How hard you sweat when you go and do the work. Are you frigging around? Are you going through the motions but not actually doing the work? Or are you blocking time? Are you focused? Are you actually getting into that work and not being distracted by other things? And then the other limiting factor, so we've got time and we've got your work rate, your propensity to work. And the other thing is skill, your starting skill. If we use the musical instrument, if you've never played a musical instrument before, it's going to take you a bit longer. You just have to learn some foundational skills before you can learn how to play the guitar or the oboe or whatever the hell it is you want to play. And business is the same. Have you got some fundamental skills here that we can build on? Or do you need to start? It actually doesn't matter where you start. It's just that is a limiting factor for the progress you make. When you have those 3 levers that you can pull, and the biggest one is working hard when you commit the time to doing it, then group coaching is by far superior, because you're just going to get more of that context. And then I mentioned earlier that your plans will almost never work out exactly as you want. So you'll need to come back and recalibrate. And recalibrating with an audience is really useful, because you get multi-source feedback, which is what we want for improvement. And then that just becomes part of your flywheel of learning and evolution, because you're testing things. If they don't work, you come back, recalibrate until you get it right. And then you can roll it out in your environment. And then you get to teach other people what you did. And teaching is a great way of learning and consolidating knowledge. And so that becomes a really nice virtuous cycle, I think, in group coaching. And one of the reasons that I love that, and I receive group coaching as you do. If we're going to coach people, we've got to take coaching. We need some integrity there. I prefer group coaching for most things. And as you and I know in Project X, There are times that you require one-to-one. It might be when you're in a really unresourceful state. Could be some commercial inconfidence or some other reason where it doesn't work in a group setting. But for the most part, and I'm talking 98% here, I personally would probably run about 8 to 10 one-to-one sessions a year, not many, compared to probably a couple of hundred of group sessions a year. So it's a very small portion of the overall.
Absolutely. So that's a bit about group versus one-to-one. You mentioned some types of coaching you've received. I'd love to hear just some types of coaching you've been through or invested in over the years. And I'm happy to share some of mine as well. I think it's useful just to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've invested very heavily in coaching. I think the first thing is just remaining curious, and because there are opportunities to learn in greater detail about so many things, part of it is choosing the right thing at the time for you. And so the things that I've received coaching on are business coaching, and I've probably received that coaching for around about 15 years now, where I've had a coaching that's around all of the systems that sit behind a business, and particularly now coaching that's the main expertise in people who run coaching businesses that you and I attend. I've had coaching in specific performance areas in medicine as well in the past where I wanted to improve certain things. I've had finance coaching, how to run better business finances as well as personal finances. I've had health coaching in terms of performance improvement and fitness. Probably other types that I've certainly seen psychologists before, which I would consider it's probably mental health coaching, really, if it's done the right way. So coaching in multiple areas, I think multiple domains, and I know you can add to that list. So over to you, Sachin.
Yeah, so I suppose my first serious foray into business coaching was probably was one-to-one. Someone from Action Coach, Nick Economy. I think now he's Nick the coach. He's not with Action now, I think. But that was our first foray, me and my business partner, and we would drive. I think we committed $3,500 a month or something. And we would drive 20 minutes, half an hour to him, the two of us every week. And we'd do a check-in, some accountability. What did you do before? And what are we going to tackle this week? And that was really interesting, a real eye-opener. But what would often happen, the bit I felt was missing was sort of it wasn't exactly tailored to general practice. This is when we owned a general practice. Take it and then make it relevant to general practice. And then, and there was no Google Translate then. That just meant it lost some of the impetus because it depended on us to translate, to then implement amongst our team. But we still made progress, and that was excellent. The other part that I found was missing was I had no one who owned a general practice who was doing the same thing. It felt quite lonely, and we didn't know as a partnership like how we were faring with implementing. And we couldn't really, whilst we could discuss it with the coach, and he was lovely and really useful, he didn't have context for general practice. And so you'd have to translate it back. So two-way. So I certainly found that was one of the limiting parts. It felt safe because there was no one else knowing what was going on. No one knew our dirty laundry. Because really, you don't go the first time often unless you've got a problem. Pain's the most common driver for change, initiator of change. And then we're more guided by the pleasure side after, but pain is normally the biggest motivator for change. And so it felt safe because it's a secret. No one else knows that we messed this up or this isn't going well. But then when I made my first forays into coaching as an individual and I was doing one-to-one coaching, I realized only after I'd moved from that and we started group, where we received group coaching and gave group coaching, that you just saw the difference. It just was not possible at all for me as a one-to-one coach to deliver the same value as someone would get in a group environment. It's just not possible because of the multitude of perspectives that could be given and lived experiences. And that became really quite evident for me. And then on the delivery side, and as we've been part of a group coaching community in terms of receiving coaching for people who run coaching businesses, then it became clear as well that the knowledge is one part, but then the nuance and the adaptation people make in terms of application to their specific situation and the different ways in which people do that then means you can take something, you can implement it. And as you said, you might need to iterate a little. Well, now you've got tens or hundreds of options for iteration. And then knowing what's worked there allows you to pick that which you consider most likely in your environment. Above it all, I think one of the best things is the ability to be safely vulnerable in a group. You don't actually need to hide. And the problem when you hide is you're sort of keeping it from the world, and you can't solve a problem you're not willing to accept. And there's great power in just saying, actually, I'm really struggling with this thing and I need some help fixing it. And suddenly you've got, yes, your coach and your coaching group, but also your peer group together and helping work on it. So I think that they're my big insights. Like you said, Todd, I mean, we've done all manner of coaching and facilitation and implementation in different businesses I've run. The Vernus scaling up, an EOS implementer, outside business as well, health, fitness, meditation. The other part, I think, just from my reflections of coaching, is having taken part in many coaching programs, there's a big sign of intent when you slap down the money. Like that's the reality, that it's just a big sign of intent and commitment that, hey, actually, this is valuable to me and my family or whoever is relevant in the situation. And I am determined, that I am committed to make a difference. And I think that is the bit that makes the difference between, oh, it's something I should do versus I must do. Yeah, like I think there's something in that. It's just a big sign of intent.
That might be useful, Sachin, just to go a bit deeper on, and I didn't give any forewarning of this, but what kind of budget? You've certainly invested in coaching to a greater degree than I have. And the person who sits next to me at a conference is probably they may regret it after the first few minutes, because I usually start grilling them with all of the stuff that I'm curious about. How's this going? How's that? Just to try and get the most out of any circumstance. Do you have a structure whereby you set a budget for the coaching? I know how much we spend as a business on coaching on a variety of different sources, but I'm really curious for somebody who's been probably doing this. I reckon I've probably done 10 to 15 years of coaching in a variety of different ways, and have always paid to go to little conferences and events that are outside of the mainstream, I guess. You've engaged in more structured coaching. Do you have a budget? Do you have a way that you approach the kind of value proposition here? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I tend to do it backwards. I just think of what is this worth to me, and then I just work backwards from that.
Expand a bit more on what is it worth to me? Like, what do you mean by that?
Try and calculate, like, how important is it to me? I'll give you some different examples. So, for example, in the business setting, I know that, say in one of these examples, say with Nick, that we're probably sitting on 300, 400, 500 grand of potential extra profit. But then we had a whole bunch of other headaches at the time that we were struggling with, that were stressful or difficult circumstances in the business. And so I knew removing those headaches plus the financial benefit was worth at least 300 or 300,000. Like, even if we hit half the profit and I remove the headaches, well, that would be pretty cool. Then I think, well, what's a realistic amount that I'm willing to invest to achieve that? Well, for me, if I'm getting a 4 or 5 time return, then I'm very happy with that, because it's not just that return that would come to me annually. There's, in that circumstance I was describing, we had some other headaches that were actually even more expensive than not making the money, to be honest, in terms of the toll they were taking on us. But then if I can confidently believe I'm going to get 4 or 5 times return, then why would I not do that? Because it's going to be faster and simpler than if I did it myself. So that's in a business setting. Typically, my experience has been the value is far greater than 4 or 5 times, but I take worst case scenario type estimates. Never had an experience where I haven't received at least 4 or 5 times value, except when I didn't follow through on my commitments on my side, which I have done once, in that I just committed but didn't commit with myself, with the work. But for example, a few years ago, I went on a health journey with a coach, and that was, people raise their eyebrows when they're asking how much do you invest, but it was important to me. And the cost of not doing it was way more expensive than the cost of doing it. Like, if I'd carried on carrying 20 kilos more than I do now, or whatever, that cost would have been way greater than any investment I made. Not just cost to me, but cost to those around me. And so I think that's the way I think of it. And for me, 3, 4 times, that's plenty. And any more than that's a bonus.
It's interesting. So you touched on 2 things that I'd like to just spend a little bit more time on, and then hand the microphone back to you. The first one is the price of inaction, which I think is often ignored. So people often think, what's the price of doing something? So what's the money I have to spend to get coaching or to get improvement or learn to play this instrument or to improve my fitness, or whatever? What's the price of the gym membership? But then very few people say, well, what's the price of inaction? And so most of us will be GPs or working general practices. They're listening to or watching this. And it's easy to have the patient sitting there in front of you, right? And just imagining them, and you're sitting there saying, these are the lifestyle changes you need to make. You need to move more. You need to eat better. Like all the common things you'll be doing about with lifestyle. It's often really obvious what the price of inaction is, because you can draw a graph and say, this is where you're going to end up. So you're going to die early. This is what's going to happen. The price of inaction is actually really large, and it's easy for people to think they're not making that trade already, that they're kind of ignoring the reality of it. I'll leave this a little bit longer. So I'll give you an example. In sessions we've done, we do a couple of sessions where people discover the opportunity in their practice, and sometimes it's $50,000 or $100,000 of profit that they've ignored, but more often than not, it's somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. And let's be really benign and say it's $250,000. And these people have owned clinics for 10 or 20 years. So you go back and you say, actually, you know what? Not knowing how to do this in the last decade has cost you $2.5 million. It's a lot of freaking money. Maybe as much as $5 million. And if I have got an Arne Jacobson chair here, I can sit down and say $5 million. Actually, let me try this one. Hang on. This is not very good for a podcast, I know, but there's a reason to get on the video now. So that's the real price of inaction. Is there is a real cost with this. Doesn't matter if it's your health or your business. You could have sold that business. You could have reinvested it in a better home, or going on a family holiday that you've always wanted to do, or whatever, leaving and being a book writer. Doesn't matter, whatever it is. I don't actually particularly care what that is, but deferring that because you couldn't be bothered unlocking the potential, that to me is a really large price to pay. And the other thing I was going to say is I process the price a little bit differently. And so what I tend to do is, what's the thing that I think I need? So I love generalist coaching because what it shows me is my unknown unknowns. So the things that I'm blind to, if I'm only picking the areas that I think I need help with, then I'm mostly going to be wrong, because they're only the things that I know I don't know. And if I was Donald Rumsfeld, I'd be talking about that unknown unknowns. And I like the fact that you come into a group and you think, shit, this person's talking about something that I have never thought about, and it's actually super important. So I now need to put this on my radar. So what I tend to do is look for more general areas, and then I know that if something comes up that's really highly specific, I can then go and get specialized advice on that. And I might choose an advisor then for that particular part of it. So that might be accounting, or it might be something else where it's really highly specific. I need an answer to this question. As I like to get 2 or 3 answers, depending on what the importance of the outcome is, then make a decision. But I tend to look for a price, and then I think to myself, what's the minimum thing that I would have to do to get a return on this investment? As in, just to get the money back, what's required? And in most cases, I think, shit, that's really small. That's really easy. And once I've kind of got the floor, then the upside is anything beyond that. So for me, I just do a really simplistic, how easy would it be to get back? For example, in our audience, people often equivocate about joining and doing group coaching, and just recruiting one GP would give them like a 3x, 4x return on their investment in coaching. But they equivocate on it because they don't want to pay the money. But the reality is, just recruiting one GP in 1 year will give you a 3 or 4-fold investment return. And so it's a really easy thing to do. You think all the other things you could do, improve the way the team functions, get more patients, blah, blah, blah. There's so many different ways of improving the business. And you and I audited this recently. There's over 450 different ways you can improve the general practice that we've got in Project X. So just one of those can help you repay that investment. And so my bar is really low, because then I know that it's up to me, right? Like, I know that coaching is about my follow through and my commitment. If I'm not extracting the value, I just have to bend the back a little bit more, do more work. Usually it's not committing to more. It's usually following through on the commitment for me, in that, okay, I've got to make sure I diarize the time, block it out, get there, do the work, and then remove all distractions in that time. I tend to turn off notifications and devices and blah, blah, blah. That helps me with that sort of stuff. So I have a lower barrier. And I also think this is the way that I think this can only exist if it creates value. And then I'm really curious about what the other people in that group are doing to create value. And often I hear stories and I'm like I said, I didn't even know that was possible. It just causes me to ask more questions of myself. And most commonly, I find myself thinking, gosh, the person who's doing that really well is not doing 1 or 2 times better than me. They're often doing 100 times better through just attention to detail or the amount of reps they're doing or their mindset or something that I think it's just the gap between what I do and they do is so big. I actually love that because then I think, wow, all right, it's pretty clear what I'm going to do.
So I think that's a very good point. I think my optimism means that I've no doubt I'm going to break even. So it doesn't even register. And I think what you're talking about there is the intangible returns. So, for example, the groups we've been part of, some of the thinking that I have now developed, not just in my work life, but outside work, has helped me in ways that I couldn't quantify. Like, I just couldn't even give a number in terms of the personal changes that have gone on inside that's allowed me to do other things beyond work in terms of experiences or non-experiences. Like, I don't have to do my laundry ever. Like, something as simple as that, I wouldn't have before.
Yeah. You're not exposed to that thinking, right?
No, just a very different way of thinking. And so those types of things, you can't even put a monetary value on because it's about the quality of your experience. And I'm not sure there is a way to quantify that. So I think
that's the transformational stuff that comes about through the community and exposure to ideas and ways of thinking that you are not familiar with.
Absolutely. I think you touched on 1 or 2 when we were there, but there's some common things we might tell ourselves when it comes to coaching. I think one of the most common, I think you touched on, is we might say, look, I already know what to do. I just need to go and do it. So I don't need coaching because I already know what to do. I just have to do it. What do you say to that?
Well, if knowledge was the answer to the world's problems, then the onset of the internet, the ubiquitous use of the internet, should have meant that we have no overweight people, great relationships, and wealthy people that aren't spending their money on frivolous or silly things. I reckon if you pause and look around, you'll probably see that's the opposite of what should have happened. So I think we can safely say that knowledge is not the same thing as an outcome. And that's the reality, right? You can know all you like, but if you don't do it, it doesn't matter. And I think everybody has this person in their family or friendship circle, I reckon. So you go to a party and you're talking to, same thing at a party, I'm always interviewing all the people I don't know. What do you do? How does that work? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's always that person who's talking a lot about, doesn't matter, Bitcoin, shares, property. They talk about it all night. They know it in minute, granular detail. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, fuck, this person must have a massive portfolio of whatever, right? But then when you ask the killer question, the answer is always the same. So you say, hey, you've talked a lot about this. You obviously know it really well. How many properties I have? Tell me about your share portfolio, what Bitcoin, whatever. No matter what it is. And they invariably answer the same thing. 0. I don't have it yet. And usually it's because they're waiting for ... I'm waiting for the right time. I'm waiting for when my kid goes to high school. I'm waiting for when this, or I'm waiting for my payroll. They're always waiting, right? These people are gunners. And so knowledge and outcomes are not the same thing. In fact, I would say that there's probably an inverse relationship between the two. So sometimes the smarter people are, the less inclined they are to act because they're a little bit more afraid of failure. And so those people that are experts don't want to look like failures. And the reality is only the people who do the work that know that failure is a part of success. They are one and the same, different sides of the same coin. The truth is you do need to get acting. And sometimes the real problem is I'm not sure where to start. People don't know exactly what they should be doing first. So they want a prescription with a sequence that's tried and tested. Do this thing. When that happens, do this thing. When that happens, do this thing. When that happens, do this, this, or this. This is how you decide. That's really what people need. They need it stepped out. And that's what coaching is. The coaching is, these are the steps. Just take really small steps and make progress and then recalibrate. Look back and say, okay, one of the great frameworks for this action, which I think is real for pretty well all of us overachievers. There's that great book by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy talking about the gain and the gap, right? And the gap is often an imagined ideal version of you that's doing all the stuff that you wish you did. And you're often measuring against that, looking forward in time where you think you should be in terms of achievements or money or whatever it might be. and where you actually are. So that can really bring about a bit of funk. Sometimes it gets you a bit frustrated. In some cases, it can get people quite depressed in reality. And the way that we really should be looking at this is turning around and looking at the gains we've made over time. And the gains only occur through taking those small, regular actions. Look, and sometimes massive action, sometimes violence is the answer. Sometimes you need to take massive action, particularly if you've got to do something to right a sinking ship. You might have to take some really large actions, but mostly it's relatively small actions over time, and consistent effort will always beat somebody who shows up irregularly, infrequently. So the reality is that it's just about having somebody map it out and walk beside you, I think, for a while before you get to know how to do it yourself, because this does take time. Look, it's a lot like parenting. As I'm sitting here describing it, I'm thinking, have your child go to primary school and you say, all right, cool, you got it all now? I'll come back and we'll have a chat when you're 18. It's sorted out.
So that's the common one. The other common one is, I don't have time right now.
Yeah. This one is a great one, because the reality is that the people who say they don't have time are the ones who most need it. Because in my experience, those people have terrible relationships to time. So usually what they really mean is frigging around doing stuff like, my calendar is full of shit, and you just need to get in and get the Eisenhower matrix or whatever. Actually, it doesn't even matter. You just need to say, you need to commit 4 hours a week to improvement, and you choose what you delete, because whatever you delete, it's not going to be that it is more valuable than over time getting better. Because imagine if in 10 years, you haven't accumulated 10 years of experience at all. You've just done 1 year 10 times. That is the worst use of time. Imagine somebody meeting you and saying, Sachin, I like the version of you last year. That was way better. This year, you've really peaked last year, and you're probably on the downhill this year. Truth is, with people you meet, you're like, man, you were way better 5 years ago, because you've made no progress. And in fact, you're still stuck on the ideas that were relevant 5 years ago. And so things are going backwards. You see that all the time. I don't understand the idea that I'm too busy. Well, the reality is they've probably got Candy Crush or some other crap on their phone. They certainly have social media. They've probably got Netflix and Prime at home. So actually everybody has the time. I said this earlier, but everyone has the same 60 minutes in an hour. Doesn't matter who you are. You might be Jeff Bezos, Taylor Swift, you're right. Still 60 minutes in an hour. You've got to allocate that to meaningful stuff. And you talked about it earlier. It's really about elevating your game. And if you don't want to be exposed to transformational thinking, I'm never doing laundry again, then you'll never get out of that race of, I don't have time. That is one of the worst beliefs that people hold. I don't have the time to make things better. And I'm going to say that if you don't challenge that belief, you're probably screwed. Not probably, you are. You're just never going to get away from that. And then what they tend to do is they get so frustrated with how busy that they are that they'll buy expensive cars and take holidays to try and get away from the reality that they just need to be structuring their priorities better, because ultimately time and priorities are interlinked. Just spend your time on the right stuff. We all get about 4,000 weeks. You've just got to spend that time wisely.
Absolutely. Talking of time, I don't have any more time to talk to you today, Todd. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I've enjoyed that. See you next time.
Thank you, Sachin.